Hello everyone and welcome to Lampcast Symphony 101 on Richard Wagner. The Lakes Area Music Festival 2020 season is sponsored in part by Hunt Utility Group and Happy Dancing Turtle, as well as Lycan's Pinehurst Resort. We're also supported by legacy funds from the Five Wings Arts Council and the Minnesota State Arts Board. Today, as in all of these Symphony 101 discussions, I am very fortunate to be joined by German-born conductor Tristan Reif, who will be discussing Wagner's life and works with us today. Before we get the lecture started, I would like to bring your attention to a few things on the bottom of your screen. So first, you'll hopefully see a chat icon as you move your cursor down to the bottom of the screen. If everyone could just examine that, click on the chat, make sure you are communicating to all attendees, all panelists and attendees, and maybe send in a little greeting and let us know where you're tuning in from and who you're watching with. Next to that chat icon, you will see a Q&A icon. That's where we will be taking questions and hopefully giving you some satisfying answers to all of your questions on Wagner. Feel free to use that feature even before the lecture is over. It's great if we can start the question and answer session with a queue of questions already in there. Finally, you'll also see a hand raise icon. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, just raise your hand or type it in the chat. And our operations coordinator, Sam Kreidenweiss, will be there in the chat to help you. So with that, I would like to welcome Tristan. Thank you for being with us this morning.
There we go. Hi, Taylor.
Hello.
All right. Hi. So happy to be here with you again.
Yes, it's good to see you. And it's good to be talking about another subject that cannot be possibly covered in a mere hour, but we will do our best.
We don't have to cover it all. It can just be an introduction to it. I think that's how we should look at it.
Whet people's appetite for Wagner.
Exactly.
And that's actually sort of where I wanted to start this discussion. I personally have taken a long time to get into the music of Richard Wagner. As we'll talk about, there are so many people who are Wagner fanatics who will fly across the world to see a ring cycle and will hop from production to production just to be a part of this music. I don't know maybe it's the machismo, maybe it's the idea of this superhuman genius man that sort of turned me off from these works initially. What am I missing? And maybe convince me to love Wagner like you do.
Well, I mean, I think one has to separate that a little bit also. To love Wagner, the man, that's very problematic. Wagner's music, however, I absolutely love and adore. And as Brahms says it, I love his music, I hate the man. But Wagner is a very interesting, deeply flawed individual, and we can talk about his biography a little bit more later, but he is someone, it's fascinating to read his life story. That is, it's a novel on its own. It's a thriller somehow, but his music, I would say, and we can focus on that now, is some of the most divine, most sublime, most touching, deeply emotional music that has ever been created, I would say, and that written in a time also where he felt opera especially needed a complete overhaul, on going out, going a step not a step further, but basically tearing down the notion that opera is just entertainment. That is just a kind of nothing wrong with entertainment, I would say, but he wanted to create a work of art that is embodying everything humanly possible, and from every art form as well. But it's so, the way he does it and the way his musical language touches one, and when you hear it is like no other. I mean, he has influenced every single composer afterwards, definitely.
Yeah, I think you even referred to his music in a discussion earlier this week as being like a drug. You were
Oh,
talking about your
absolutely,
own listening experience this week.
absolutely. When I listen to Wagner and then listen to Wagner's music afterwards, I can't go back to any other music.
Oh.
Everything else, let's say apart from Beethoven or Brahms, also seems trite.
Yeah.
Somehow he unlocks something in me, and I know in many others as well, that that is very unique. And so today I was listening to Siegfried's Trauermarsch, the funeral march of the Götterdämmerung, the fourth and last part of the Ring, and it was, I got chills, I got tears in my eye. It's, I mean, and I haven't even listened and watched the whole opera right now. I mean, I have in the past, but just listening that music and it's so touching. It's deep, and yeah, I mean, it makes you think and it makes you question, and it's something I would never want to miss.
Yeah, and that sort of brings us to the fact that there are very few points in music history when there is one undisputed figure who is the center of Western art music at the time. And he's one of those, and he's coming sort of on the heels of Beethoven, who was the last one. But this is,
right.
He really represents in his lifetime everyone else who is working in music, and particularly in opera, is having to define themselves either in alignment or in opposition to this one figure, which is really an incredible feat.
I mean, some of them were also positioned in that way. I mean, that Brahms was positioned to be the head of the opposition to Wagner was, that's a different subject that we can also talk about, but
yeah,
we'll see. Yeah, I mean, it is amazing. Beethoven, Bach, they were singular figures, and one could really divide kind of the Western European art form and the history of it to times before these composers and times after. And Beethoven was a huge hero of Wagner's, as well as Mozart, and those were kind of the two. And also, I mean, there were other influences, but those two composers were he also put on a pedestal and adored. Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so we've sort of described the way that people feel about this music. What are those musical and compositional techniques that make Wagner Wagner? What are the tools that he is using to create this very influential type of music?
Maybe let's go from kind of a bigger picture to a smaller picture. I mean, I mentioned already he wanted to create a work of art that the drama in opera is of paramount importance. That there's no trite, just kind of silly, so to speak, plot going on that people will sing with beautiful melodies and just the arias and duets and finales and all of that, which obviously there's great music in that form too, but he wanted to throw that all overboard and make sure that the drama is the most important. That starts with the libretto as well that he wrote. He was, in my knowledge, he's the only composer who wrote every single libretto of his operas, which is a gigantic feat if you think about it. I mean, not just writing this incredible music, but also the libretto. We can talk about the libretto and some of its issues another time too. But it's quite a feat. Then he wrote every single stage instruction. He wrote, where the moon should glimpse through the clouds, or when certain people should come on stage, and so forth. But what is most astonishing musically, maybe, is that this through composed operas, especially the later ones, but that the music is the vehicle for drama, and that everything, and we can talk about leitmotifs in this part too, but that everything that you can hear in the music is bringing the drama forward, is either reflecting, and about leitmotifs, which is basically these motifs or these phrases or these musical snippets that he writes in the score, in the music, that we understand or help us understand what's happening, even before or at the same time that the protagonists on stage know what's happening. And The Ring, obviously, that's the main work we used where every single part of day or object or character has its own leitmotif. So when this one leitmotif comes in, the listener, especially because you hear it a lot of times through the course of the operas, and that you can kind of synthesize the audio experience with the visual as well as what's happening in the narrative, the audience will know what's happening because of the music, and not necessarily only because what they're seeing on stage. And that's really special, and that's very powerful storytelling. And if we want to go into details of harmony or so, things like that, he pushed the harmonic spectrum, the harmonic language, so much further than anyone has before, and to a point where one almost didn't have a center of harmony especially in Parsifal, also in specific parts of the music, and that's the harmony. And I've always been a harmony geek, I guess, or nerd. That touches me very, very deeply. And I don't think you have to be educated in that sense, or need to know whatever D minor is the key of death or whatever, things like that, to understand the importance or the emotional impact of certain harmonic phrases and certain harmonic steps.
Right. And going back to what you were talking about with leitmotifs, I think when we describe them sort of intellectually, they can sound a little bit intimidating, or it might seem like something, oh, well, I probably can't hear that. Like, you probably need to really know the music to be able to hear these little motives that represent whether it's a character or an emotion or a place or a time. But I would say it's almost similar to when we were talking about form last week in the classical period. There is a sort of visceral reaction that listeners have, and even if you don't know that you're recognizing a leitmotif, there's going to be something about that repetition that's going to stir something in you, and that's, I guess, kind of the magic of Wagner, is his ability to manipulate in a way the listener and the viewer to see the drama through his eyes and to experience it the way he wants you to experience it.
Absolutely. As I said, I think sure, even if you have no idea about the leitmotifs, and anyone, also musicians who have played it, or musically educated, I would say it now, listening through the Wagner, I'm sure we would all miss a lot of leitmotifs, but that's not the point. Yeah. But anyone listening to this will make a connection between, if you hear Valhalla and you hear this brass chorale, dee, dee, da, dee, da, da, dee, dee, something like that, or you hear the spear or the sword motif, you hear it, you make a connection in your brain, even if it's subconsciously. And then when that comes back, you have a sense of, oh, I know this, I know I know that. And also what's so interesting, and psychologically, what Wagner does is with these leitmotifs, he changes them, not necessarily not the pitches. I mean, the harmonization, the the emotional impact of the same motif can change, and it becomes as if there's a different light set on this character. One is all the stage is filled with red light, warm, and then it's very blue and icy. That he does with his music, his writing. And so to see and to hear the same motive and the same character in this light and then in a different light, subconsciously that does something with you. And it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily say, oh, that's what's happening right now.
Yeah.
You don't have to necessarily consciously understand it and pinpoint it.
And it's interesting because you were talking about his operas, especially as he progresses as an artist, becoming through composed, and that just means that it's not broken up into arias or songs and recitatives. This is if you're there for a 4-hour Wagner opera, it's going to start at the beginning and it's going to finish at the end. It's not broken up into a lot of different things. And so it's almost like, in a way, those motifs become the structural pillars that are supporting the work, whereas composers before him would use form to make that architecture. He's using, he's again, putting the focus on the drama through these motifs and using that as the structural tool that keeps them together.
Yes. I mean, not in every opera. I mean, there are, obviously, you can excerpt certain, arias of Dutchman as well, but yes, I agree. There's this kind of sense of this ongoing narrative that is going, and not something that, okay, now this person is singing about that, and then you have the recitative that is pushing the action forward, and then you have another aria where you reflect on that. He doesn't do that. He really, it's the narrative that is going on, and if you miss something, it's not going to be repeated necessarily. It's really, you read the libretto, you read it, and it's not necessarily coming back.
Right.
There are exceptions, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
So
there was I just saw a question popping up about the connection between Wagner and his leitmotifs and film scores. And since we're just there, I think
excellent. Yeah, take it.
I mean, every movie composer, I would say, was influenced by Wagner. I mean, everyone, and obviously by others too. But the use of leitmotifs to be immediately recognized and synthesized to connected with a certain character, that is very much a way for movie soundtracks, movie composers to play with our narrative and our emotion, and with when we see Star Wars. I mean, there are all these leitmotifs of certain characters that come back, and not just when you see the character on screen, you will hear the leitmotif of that character, but also when they're just talked about.
Yeah. And that just goes back to this point that basically all music, all Western classical music that comes after Wagner is influenced by Wagner in some way. I mean, we see it in the sort of harmonic palette of Debussy. We even see it in the Second Viennese School with the invention of 12-tone and atonal techniques, that sort of stretching of harmonic language and chromaticism to its breaking point. It's amazing how his influence went in so many different directions. It's still the locus from which all of those things are sort of springing.
Richard Strauss, Mahler, Bruckner, also when we go into the avant-garde, Boulez, and so forth, and also just the way we conceptualize and have an idea of an opera now, and Puccini too, have an idea of how an opera is structured and what goes into an opera. That has been just revolutionized by Wagner and has then influenced everyone coming after.
Right, and so he's a
sorry, no, I mean,
go ahead.
Sorry, we were talking over each other, kind of delayed there. No, I mean, I was just wondering whether we briefly wanted to talk about the riff in the or where we talk about the influences, but also in the kind of the oppositions of absolute music and program music that have then kind of opened up, and the kind of school of program music of Berlioz and Liszt and Wagner and so and then forth, and then the absolute music camp with Schumann and Brahms and others. I mean, this is something that has basically both camps. They beziehen auf. They look at Beethoven and have their origin in Beethoven. The program music camp that says, well, under every good music there needs to be a narrative, there needs to be a program attached to it, and that comes from the seed of the Sixth Symphony, of the Pastoral Symphony of Beethoven, which has this. It doesn't necessarily have a program, but it does have these emotions and this pastoral scene, and with the storm and so forth that is attached to it, and that Beethoven also wrote in the movement titles. And then the absolute music camp just said, no, music stands for itself, and there doesn't have to be a program attached to it. It really can speak for itself, and that's how it reaches into the depth of humanity. Not with a program, not when we assign words, not when we assign a story and narrative to it, but when it can speak just for itself, and then everyone can have their own interpretation of it and reading of it as well. And Brahms, as I said, he was kind of positioned in that. Yes, he did not like Wagner, and he did write an essay that was prematurely sent out or published, but he did respect his music, Wagner's music, very much, but just didn't like the man, which is understandable.
To do, yes, and we will get there. Well, and sort of following up with that, this was a revolutionary figure in music, but also just a very quirky individual. Talk to us a little bit about his life and his quirks.
Yes, I mean, he was someone who, I already said at the beginning, he was a deeply flawed individual. He had a gambling problem, drinking problem, party. He had a passion for unattainable women, for women who were already married, and this whole idea of erotic love we can see throughout his operas as well. But so one time, so he's from Leipzig. One time he gambled away in one night. He gambled away his mother's estate, or mother's retirement fund, up to the last thaler, the last coin, and then he won everything back in the same night. And oh God! I mean, that was an awakening for him. He still racked up debts upon debts, also because he had a passion, an obsession with both silk and satin and rose scented perfume, and that one would ask, why was this guy always kind of broke? But if you think about all these, just about these few issues, then one understands very quickly. And so he had to flee. He was on the run for a lot of his early life there. He fled from his creditors. And he went also to Riga, he went to London and so forth. He came back at some point to Dresden to become he was a great conductor. He was maybe one of the first star conductors. And that is another topic as well. I won't open this right now, but brilliant, and also had many, great disciples. But he was, where was I? In Dresden, he was working as a conductor, Kapellmeister at the court. But then, because he had the ideals of anti-monarchist, and he was, you know, leading even some of the student revolts in 1848 and so forth. And so all where revolution was all over Europe happening, and so he had to flee from his employer, from the King of Saxony. So he went to Switzerland, and with his wife Minna, and he convinced, he was absolutely charming. He was a king of charm. He was he had manipulated people. People wanted to do things for him, and he managed to convince this very rich, his silk merchant, by the way, Wesendonck, and his wife, to build a cottage on their estate for them, for Wagner and his wife, for him to work on. So he was there, then kind of started some kind of affair with the wife, and thus the Wesendonck Lieder were born. And some of these Wesendonck Lieder are I mean, they're absolutely beautiful. Träume, for instance, as well. And some of these were studies for his opera that he was writing right now, the Tristan Soldier. And I mean, Tristan and Isolde is a masterpiece. If you listen to the, listen to the second act duet, or also the Transfiguration at the end. I mean, it's absolutely, it's gripping. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. Yeah. It really, I mean, that some of his music really puts you in a state of ecstasy. And when you hear it live, especially, I mean, I was absolutely gripped this week, especially when I was researching a lot and listening a lot for our talk, and just I was gripped. But seeing Wagner's operas live, that does something to you. That is just something incredibly gripping.
Yeah. And we're sort of talking about his personal life and his journey as a person, and probably something that people who even don't know a lot about Wagner know, at least in some way, is that he is associated with anti-Semitism. Talk a little bit about how he was positioned there, and sort of the way that is thought about now, his positions and his views there.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't positioned. He put himself there. I mean, unfortunately, this was a dominating opinion in Europe, anti-Semitism, and at the time, and was rampant all over Europe, and not just during the times of the Second World War. He was one, though, who was very loud and very vocal about it all. I read his treatise, his Judaism in music, this week, and it was sickening. It is. I've read it in parts before, but reading the whole thing is horrifying and yes, sickening. And he basically said, and some of this is also born through jealousy. In for instance, he wrote his first opera and wanted to be performed in Berlin, and Mendelssohn, Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy, was chef there, a music director there, and didn't want to perform his opera. So he had a year, his lifelong conflict with him and hated him. Also Meyerbeer and others.
And also, we should say Felix Mendelssohn, from a very prominent German Jewish family, converted to Christianity.
Yeah, I mean, it's so Wagner in this essay also wrote, basically he was viewing Jewish people as a different race. He was viewing them, even if they live in the European countries, even if they speak the language, and are German, are Italian, are French, whatever. He doesn't view them as being from that country. Wagner views them as they always have the Jewishness, and since that is their first language and not German, that's only their second language. They can never write music the way he could, or the way other people, non-Jewish people would write music in Germany, and that's the only way. And so he would, and the success that that Mendelssohn, for instance, had, he could not live with it, and he could not. Well, he basically said this is subpar music, and that that even if you're, he also differentiated between a common Jew and a educated Jew, and Mendelssohn, with his family and also his grandfather being a famous philosopher, poet, author, right. He was an educated Jew. But even with all the education, you will never be able to write in that language as if it's your own. It's always only superficial, and it only grazes the top. So you can never dig down deep into the essence of music. And that is, I mean, that's some anti-Semitic BS, and it's just, it's sickening reading that. And that's, I mean, I do have problems like you as well regarding the man Wagner. He's a fascinating personality, and it is really thrilling to read his biography, but it's sickening. He wasn't even the worst, but that doesn't make it better.
Right, exactly. And it's just one in a litany of historical figures and especially sort of great men whose views sort of in some way unfortunately mar the good work that they have done in some ways. It's
and I mean, we talked last week. We talked, or in the interview, we talked about Kant and the Enlightenment, right? And I think that's, I mean, we talked about this offline too, but about how important it is just to know everything about the person.
Right.
It's important to get a full sense of the person, and to know the bad and the good. And I, as I said, I felt embarrassed to not know about Kant's racism and his dividing the one human race into different colors. I'm embarrassed that I did not know that. And so things, but one needs to know, of course, about Wagner's anti-Semitism as well. The music he wrote is magnificent.
Right.
And
well,
that is...
Let's get back to that music. One term that many people may have heard, may have not, is Gesamtkunstwerk, which is Wagner's own coining of a term that means total artwork. So he's talking about wanting to make in his operas one unified art form where music, poetry, design, dance, all of these things are incorporated to sort of create this new thing. Could you sort of talk to me about what Gesamtkunstwerk is trying to accomplish, and maybe do that sort of through the lens of his very famous cycle of operas, the Ring Cycle? That's
okay, good.
A toughie.
We're just starting the talk now, right?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, and I've hit some of these topics already, just but it's basic the Gesamtkunstwerk, as you said, bringing all the art forms together. That, well, as I already said, that hasn't been done before in that way. And if we talk about the Ring, I mean, it's well, how long is it in total? Is it 12, 13, 14, 15 hours? Well, I don't, but I mean, the Rheingold is the prologue, so to speak, and then you have 3 evenings of the Ring des Nibelungen, and so you have Valkyrie and you have Siegfried and you have Götterdämmerung, and that's really, I mean, he was always fascinated with Norse and Germanic myths. I mean, we can see that in others are also kind of Arthurian legends and Holy Grail legends, Lohengrin, Parsifal, but myths also like the Dutchman and so forth. And the myth of this Germanic or Norse myth of the Ring der Nibelungen, it's so hard to put that work in 2 sentences because it's a massive undertaking. It is really, I mean, it's an investment if you want to hear it, just time-wise, but I would say it's absolutely worth it. It's as if you would binge watch your favorite show for a few days, and then, you know, you have a 4.5-hour night with Wagner or Get and so forth. It's really the most riveting stories, and the stories are very broad. They're philosophical matter topics. They're the topic of love, the theme of erotic love, but also of love that transcends it all. Everything that you can possibly think of is encompassed in that opus, in that big four opera long endeavor. And it starts with the Rhine Gold, with the gold of the Rhine maidens, and then ends, the ring goes back to the Rhine maidens at the end. But that ring is a symbol of power, and also changes to being a symbol of love. And then you have the big, you know, the kind of the characters, whether it's the god of the gods or Wotan, or then you have Siegfried, of course. You have gods, you have heroes, you have the half human, half god characters. You have the mythological characters, and you also have the what did I not say yet? The Nibelungen. Yes. So it's a lot of. It's also a classist. Is that a classicistic? Or
yes.
It basically, Wagner also has divides these characters into different classes and their struggle within and with each other, and it's a big piece, and I love it.
And I like sort of the way that you were talking about it as sort of a very early Netflix miniseries. If we think about all of us over the past months sitting down and maybe watching too much TV, I think, this ring, this perfect cycle, as you said, that moves from the ring in the hands of the Rhine maidens to the ring back in their hands. It is a sort of self-contained little mini-series drama. It would be, and it even has all of the sort of supernatural elements that are so popular right now in current TV and everything like that. So I think there is a great parallel to the entertainment that we still enjoy today in the ring.
Absolutely.
And obviously it's hugely influential we've talked about his influence in film scores and everything, but the way that he approaches drama is so important, and it sort of speaks to the success of this idea of the Gesamtkunstwerk, of that total artwork, in the way that entertainment has progressed since then, not only in opera.
Yes, no, absolutely. I mean, this is a detail, but the way we think about opera, or the way we expect opera too. I mean, opera singers don't just need to stand there and sing, and that's what he wanted to change as well. He wanted people and singers to be real actors and actresses, and not just, you know, stand at the edge of the stage and sing the aria and then be done with it again. No, he really wanted to create this big opus.
Mm-hmm. Well, as usual, we have bitten off much more than we could possibly chew in this limited time, but I wanted to give a little bit of a chance for us to answer some questions from the audience today. We have one here that says, can you talk about the connection between Wagner and his leitmotifs in film scores? Oh, we did that. We certainly did. And which composer before Wagner used leitmotifs to build their compositions?
I mean, in some ways, many composers done that, but in a way, more or less, they assigned a melody to a certain character, whether it's in Beethoven's Fidelio or not. But you have certain motives or melodies, subscribe to them. But Wagner was definitely the first who built his whole narrative on those leitmotifs and brought them back so repeatedly, and also in a psychological way more than anyone else that has done before.
Right. We have.
I mean, there are these motives also. I mean, whether it's the Dies Irae motive, or that also or Berlioz also used some of leitmotif. So Wagner wasn't the first, but he was the one who pushed it further than anyone.
Yes. Okay, we have one. Did Wagner compose any music that was not opera?
Yes. I mean, the Wesendonck-Lieder that I mentioned, the songs for soprano and orchestra, or soprano and piano, but they were also orchestrated later. Then he wrote a piano piece. He wrote a symphony. He did. That was all very, very early on. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he did write. Sorry?
And so once the opera bug bit him, he didn't really go back. Is that correct? Like
no, other than
his mature operas.
Other than Wesendonck-Lieder, which he wrote just before Tristan. Yeah.
Right, and I think and that can also be seen almost as a sketch for.
In some ways, yes. Yeah.
Excerpts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. We have one more. Oh, great. So besides the Ring Cycle, what is your favorite opera by Wagner, or which is the most challenging to perform?
Okay. I have to say I haven't listened or watched every single opera of Wagner's yet. That's so. For instance, I haven't seen Lohengrin yet, but okay. I would say yes. The Ring is a masterpiece, and I adore Walküre and Götterdämmerung. Rheingold also because it's one of the first pieces of Wagner. Well, that's the first piece of the Ring that I studied, and also because in my when I was 17 or 18, I just thought, oh great, it's short. Let's start with that. Right. So it's 2 hours long, something like that, and then a Parsifal is a masterpiece. That is his last opera, and that's a very, very hard one. Also, the pacing of it all. It's funnily enough, instrumentation wise, it's a smaller orchestra than the Ring, where he starts. You know, he has Wagner-Tuben and everything. Lots of new brass instruments that never have been played on before. He basically invented those. But for Parsifal, for his last opera, he changed it back to a smaller kind of romantic orchestra. Dutchman is, I would say, also because maybe it was the first one that I studied conducting wise. That is a good gateway drug, I would say. That Dutchman, the Flying Dutchman, is a great opera that both for musicians, conductors, and singers and audience members alike, I think that's a great first step into Wagner's world, and you have everything in there as well: the myth, the love, the disaster at the end, and great choruses and great music.
Great. Jim Storm is asking, is Wagner embraced worldwide?
Yes, he is not allowed to be, I believe still not allowed to be performed in Israel because of his anti-Semitism. Yeah. But worldwide, I would say everyone is acknowledging his genius as a composer.
Right, and I would say even Wagner is sort of a stand-in for the entire repertoire of opera. I think that sort of image that we have of the Walküre in the horn helmet and the spear is sort of an international shorthand for what opera is for a lot of people.
Yes, and there's a problem a little bit with it too, because opera has become a performances or an event for the quote unquote elite or people think that it is. I don't believe that, but Wagner, the cult of Wagner, and everyone going to Bayreuth, where he built the hall to his liking, and where that's the ideal spot to hear Wagner. This cult, this religion, almost this fanaticism, almost about it, which I do understand in that point, absolutely. But that has alienated a lot of other people who sometimes, as you said, sometimes it's just nice to be entertained.
For sure, yes.
Sometimes I don't want to be faced with immortal questions or emotional questions and with existential questions, which Wagner does and which the Ring does. Sometimes, but I absolutely live for that. I think that music is so much more than entertainment. There's, but that Wagner himself would probably fight against it, because he was for the people. He was very much a person who wanted to write for the common person and not for the elites. But it's conflicting also. I mean, basically, we talked about all his debts that he accumulated and all the money he was owing to people, and only until Ludwig II, the king of Bavaria, became his patron and paid off every creditor, he was able to live in Germany again and live here and work and be also successful in that way. So, and then he was basically endeared to him and to a monarch that was not his intention at the beginning, I would say. So this whole divide of opera being for the elite, that cult of Wagner's operas, that has definitely contributed to that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a great question from Jacob Sirik, who asks, what is it about Wagner's music that makes singers need to specialize in his music?
That's a good question. I mean, so the way he uses the voice with his, let's say, just technically, his orchestra is fairly big, so people would think you need huge voices, and because he uses the forces, so to speak, to high dynamics, loud dynamics, people think that you have to have a loud voice and have certain stamina in the vocal region. But honestly, that's sometimes very misleading. Most of the case, I would say, because some of the most beautiful Wagner singing I've heard is when first of all the balance is very correct between the orchestra and the singers, and when the singers can really phrase and be musical about their phrases, and to not just scream their way on the top of the lungs over the orchestra. I mean, there are some climaxes where that's absolutely essential, or not essential, where it's very gripping in that sense. But people shouldn't shout, and I think this whole development of then this Heldenfach, heroes. You need to be a hero tenor, or so Heldenfach, baritone and bass and so forth. One should be very careful about that, because I don't like it when people scream at me.
I agree.
I want people to bring me in. I want singers to really bring forth the narrative, the questions, the emotion in it, and not by just
and some of that even gets into the design of opera venues since the mid-19th century. When we think of Bayreuth, which is sort of the Wagner Mecca that he built, we were even talking yesterday about how the design of that space is conducive to having a big orchestra that can play loud and still being able to have a singer sing with nuance. Whereas if you are at, let's say, how many seats do we think Bayreuth is? Maybe 1,500 or something like that.
Yeah, not like the big halls. It's not. But also to the orchestra. The orchestra is actually kind of tucked away under the stage. So you can't. It's not like the normal orchestra pits or opera pits that you would know that where you can basically look into the pit and that's where everyone is.
Right.
No, it's kind of tucked away. So that also means that there's a different balance. So the singer doesn't have to scream the whole time. They can really sing and deliver it, and that's fascinating. Yeah, that was his ideal.
When we think of him composing these things, I think it is important to remember that he was. If we think about the Metropolitan Opera, it's like 5,000 seats or something like this.
Is it that big?
It's big. It's big. Don't quote me on that. But like some of these spaces, especially in the United States, these 20th century and 21st century halls are so big that
in the US, everything is better when it's bigger.
Right, everything.
That seems to be in the opera houses. Sorry, I'm very stereotyping.
That's kind of a trap that I think some people have fallen into with the thing of Wagner singing, is just saying bigger is better, when maybe that's not historically what the intention of the music drama is.
Right.
Yeah. Well, we have one more question today, and it's a great one that you are particularly well poised to answer. It says, you mentioned that Wagner was an outstanding conductor. What qualities marked him or make anyone an outstanding conductor?
What marked him, or what was his belief, is that a conductor truly has to understand the music, not just in, performing it and beating time. That was the worst that he could ever imagine, is the conductor just beating time and you all play together with me. No, you need to understand the tempo and the arc of the music. And that's really one of the most important things for any conductor to understand, is how is the pulse of this music? What's the drive? Where is the climax? There are not hundreds of climaxes all the time. You need to make sure you pace it well, and that pacing that's very much on the forefront of his mind. I know from reading some of his treatises, but also on every conductor's mind. I mean, he wrote a 60-page, I think, or 80-page manifesto on conducting. And that's part of it. And I think any conductor, to the second part of the question, it also needs to find their way of being themselves, being authentical to yourself, and communicating the music and the essence of music and the emotional impact of that music, communicating that to the orchestra and communicating that to the audience. The worst thing one could do as a conductor is be kind of think of a choreograph and then do that no matter what's happening. You need to be in the moment. As a conductor, you need to both prepare and breathe and prepare the moments and then react to it as well. Be in the moment at the same time. So it's kind of conflicting views, but statements, but they are really important, that you are connecting with the musicians, really hearing them as well. Obviously, there's a lot of work to be done in the rehearsals, but in the performance itself, you need to be there and make music together, and that's really crucial.
Yeah. And we have sort of a follow-up to that. Are there any recordings of Wagner's music with Wagner conducting?
No.
Alas, yes, he was only.
If I don't know, but I don't.
He only lived until 1883. Is that correct? So I think that would put him before he would have had a chance to record anything.
Yeah, but he had, especially Hans und Bülow and Richter also, two very influential and very, mentees, these two conductors, but then others too, who were very close to him and also learned from him, and who we do have recordings of.
Right.
I believe
so too.
I believe so too. I hope I'm not making things up. I know that I've listened to some, I thought. Mm-hmm. But and then of course also then you have other you know, conductors and composers too. Richard Strauss was a great composer, and composer, but also great conductor as well.
Right. And that brings me to a great point. We have a specially curated playlist by Tristan Reif on Spotify of some of his Wagner favorites. So you can sort of get to hear the recordings that he's been listening to, and I'll have Sam paste that link in the chat. So if you want to check that out.
It's not everything, and it's not an exhaustive. It's 3.5 hours long, but still there's so much more we could listen to. But I just put some there, also of conductors that I really like. Marek Janowski, for instance, great kind of conductor, opera and Wagner conductors, and just listen to some of his music. Definitely, I mean, if I can draw your attention to some. I mean, I am doing that through the Spotify list, but definitely listen to Tristan and Isolde, the prelude, and also the Isolde's Transfiguration at the end.
Yeah.
To the second act love duet that really ends in that. Well, it gets interrupted. That climax gets interrupted in every sense of the ways of the meanings. And then also, of course, we talked about Dutchman. Listen to some of that, but The Ring, Siegfried's Funeral March I mentioned, Brünnhilde's immolation scene at the end. I mean, yeah, and it doesn't get better. I don't know if I even put any Parsifal in there yet. Anyway, I think I can add to it as well,
it will be
and
a
you
living
can
document.
exactly. It's just something. It's a start for you to to listen a little bit.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time today to dig
It was my pleasure.
Another bottomless topic. Yeah, and thank you for all of your work and research. For all of those of you listening, thank you for joining us. I'll have Sam put a link to our website where you can donate. Please consider a donation to the Lakes Area Music Festival, which makes events like this possible. And I look forward to joining you next week, Christian, where we will talk about one of my favorite topics, which is Shostakovich, his works, and his relationship to Stalinist Russia. And not to mention the fact that this coming Tuesday, we will have another lecture by Alison Chu of Yale University. I hope you'll register online and tune in for that. And so until then, enjoy that playlist, listen to all the Wagner you can, and we look forward to joining you again this week. Thank you, Christian.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Taylor.
Bye.